Why the tanks? Vladimir Putin wanted a lightning capture of Kyiv, but now seems happy to settle for a long artillery war that potentially could last years. Ukraine's allies argue that only tanks can speed up a win. We'll ask why and look at the World War I-style trench warfare that right now is flattening city after city in the Donbas. Free the leopards is the cry, but Germany, maker of Europe's most popular tank, wants to be certain it's the right move before turning its back on 7 decades of non-aggression. France, maker of the Leclerc tank, is also weighing the benefit and cost of sending sophisticated machinery that needs constant upkeep, and whether it's the inflection point where NATO finds itself directly at war with Russia. With Moscow and Kyiv each talking up plans for spring offensives, when is the right time to decide, and what happens then? Today in the France 24 debate, we're wondering about the debate that's taking place over tanks. Joining us from Malaga, former French Air Force Chief of Staff, General Jean-Paul Paloméros. Thanks for being with us.
Good evening.
Also with us from Brussels, German member of the European Parliament from the Green Party, Viola von Krammen. Welcome.
Good evening.
Also in the Belgian capital, Frédéric Moreau, associate researcher at French international relations think tank IRIS. Welcome.
Good evening.
And we welcome back from Vilnius, political analyst Alexandra Filipenko. How are you?
Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm fine. The France 24 debate where you can join the conversation, and you have, on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. When the Russians recently took the salt mining town of Soledar in the east of Ukraine, authorities in Kyiv compared the battle for nearby Bakhmut to World War I's Battle of Verdun. Estonia's public broadcaster last week went to the front line west of the city of Donetsk to Krasnokoriva. Listen to what the soldiers had to say.
From
Mariinka, diversionary groups constantly moved towards our positions and tried to capture them. They also used gas. They used chlorine gas grenades. This gas corrodes the lungs.
We need more shells and more cannons. We have enough handguns and grenade launchers, but we lack ammunition. Of course, something heavier like tanks would be good.
General Paloméros, that call for ammunition, that is a familiar cry these days.
Yeah, well, maintaining a permanent flux of munition is quite a challenge in Ukraine. Coming from the Allied to Ukraine, it's a long way to the battlefront. So we know that maintenance and munitions are key to, and logistics at large is key to the success of any operation. So it's true that this is quite a tough time for Ukrainian forces. Not only they lack munitions, but they lack heavy means like tanks to, I would say, regain the initiative, regain the offensive. For the moment, they are on the defensive part.
They're on the defensive, you say. And you heard in that clip one of the soldiers claiming that the Russians are using chlorine gas. The ban on the use of gases came after World War I when there were horrific scenes of soldiers gassed. Is it right to make these comparisons to World War I?
No, I mean, every war is different. The technical means that they have today, equipments are very different. This is an image, I would say, but nothing to see with Verdun or any type of the First World War battle. And we have not heard about really this toxic gas. It needs some proof to be reported. There is an information warfare which is going on, so let's be careful on that. But of course, this is a terrible battle, a lot of victims, and no figures today, but one day we will discover what is behind it.
You mentioned how right now Ukraine on the defensive. Moscow claims to have captured the village of Krasnopelia in the last 24 hours. That's in the northeast, actually. That's near Sumy. Alexandra Filipenko, do you agree that the Ukrainians right now in the Donbas are on the defensive, or is it basically a front line that's frozen till spring?
On the one hand, it looks like it's frozen, but now more and more every day, especially today, it looks like the Russian army continues to be on the offensive, especially around Sumy and in the Bakhmut region, and trying to capture the whole Donetsk region. Despite suffering numerous casualties, they are trying to move forward. And I think that is exactly why President Zelensky is trying to push so hard to get more ammunition and more tanks, because for now it seems that the line might be frozen, but Russia doesn't care about losing as many men as they are losing right now, even though they're suffering huge casualties. But so that is why President Zelensky is saying that they need more artillery, more ammunitions, armored vehicles, and tanks, mostly tanks, because it's especially today, during the day, Russian military carried out 4 missile strikes on Ukrainian settlements. Some were hit down, and 18 airstrikes. So that is why Russia looks like it's launching more and more rockets, and it looks like it's coming to the offensive.
Frédéric Moreau, you heard there Alexandra saying it, that the Kremlin doesn't care as much about casualties. Does that mean that time is on Moscow's side?
Yes, of course. President Putin has 2 main advantages. He has no real elections, and he has nobody to account to. So, in his view, he's not losing the war. It just doesn't matter how many casualties he can endure. Time is on the side of Russia. So that is the reason why we should act very quickly. There is an urgent need for Ukrainian troops to get those tanks. Those tanks give 4 main advantages to the troops on the ground. They give them mobility, they give them protection, they give them firepower. And on top of that, they give enhanced equipment like night vision. So they will give the Ukrainians the opportunity to build a counter-offensive in the spring. But what we have to take in mind is that what is important is the number. The number of tanks is very important, and not only having the tanks, but also having the clarity in the decisions, because the planners, the Ukrainian planners, have to know now if they will be able to count on those tanks or not.
They have to be able to know now. Do you feel as though the decision has been made? It's just a question of when?
I don't know. To be quite honest, there is a little bit of fog of war. Yesterday night, Ms. Baerbock said that if Germany was asked by Poland to give the tanks, they will give the tanks. But then the Minister of Defense said that the decision has not been made yet, and it will be made in the Chancellery. So it's a little bit confusing. And that's exactly what we don't need. We need clarity for the Ukrainian generals, the Ukrainian planners, to make their own decisions.
Of course, as you were saying, there is confusion. Before I turn to Viola von Kramen, just a reminder for our viewers, last Friday's big meeting of defense ministers in Ramstein, Germany, was billed as it would be the big turning point where NATO would go all in with the tanks. That meeting turned out to be a bit of a damp squib. But since then, the Poles have conferred with the Germans. The Germans came to Paris. EU foreign ministers have now gone to Brussels. All for what? Something, perhaps. Fadika Bael has more.
It's continuing to mount pressure on Western allies to supply the machinery that Kyiv is asking for. Poland said Monday it would request Berlin's authorization to send German-made Leopard 2 battle tanks to aid the war effort. Whilst it needs Germany's consent to send them to a non-NATO country, Warsaw said ultimately it would make its own decisions.
We're constantly pressing the government in Berlin to make them share their Leopards. They have over 350 active Leopards and about 200 in storage. We'll ask for permission, but this is a secondary theme. Even if eventually we do not get the permission, even if Germany is not in this coalition, we'll hand over our tanks together with others to Ukraine.
Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has previously stated that if formally asked, it would not stand in the way. But she's also a Green Party member in the ruling coalition, who've been pushing for stronger German involvement in Ukraine. Whilst Chancellor Olaf Scholz has remained vague, drawing criticism for dragging his feet on sending military hardware. But his administration says it will not be rushed.
The German government doesn't rule out supplying Leopard tanks. It just hasn't decided yet whether it will do so. But maybe it's also good to weigh things up, to consider many things before you take a reckless step that you bitterly regret in the end.
Despite Germany's reluctance, it remains one of the top weapons donors to Ukraine. Kyiv has been calling for these tanks for months, believing the Leopards are capable of significantly changing the situation on the ground, giving them the push to thwart Russia's renewed aggression.
Viola von Krammen, why the hesitancy on the part of the Social Democrats?
Well, one can only speculate what is the reason. I guess there are a couple of reasons. First of all, we cannot speak about a rush. I mean, we speak about this topic now for months. For weeks. This is so urgent that when the Chancellor says there is no need for rush now, this is really cynical. And you have quoted our Foreign Minister, our Minister for Economy, who is actually in charge of giving this permission to other countries who would like to send these Leopard tanks to Ukraine, who is in charge, had also said, yes, we cannot prevent others to send Leopards to Ukraine. So I do hope that the Polish government or the Finnish or also the Spanish, the Danish, the Swedish, whoever would like to support to Ukraine as soon as possible will really send a formal request to the German government, and they can deal with that and hopefully in a proper way. We had heard different messages, that's true, but on the other hand, I'm pretty sure that everyone understood there's really an emergency. And as I said, the pressure does not only come from yesterday or didn't only come from yesterday, but now for weeks and months.
For weeks and months, as you say, it's been discussed, but it's only in the last couple of weeks that German public opinion has swung in favor of exporting the tanks. This is a 180-degree turn from a country that was adverse to getting involved militarily in foreign conflicts.
I could imagine if you had explained from day one on, and you had this remarkable speech of the Chancellor 3 days after beginning of the full aggression, you could have had a different public opinion already in May or in June. I mean, it is really up to the leadership and in person of the Chancellor. I think there is a potential for improvement of communication in that respect. So I do understand why the public opinion is lacking a little bit behind, so to say. But when you see and when you follow the pictures from Ukraine, when you're listening to civilians, to citizens, to ordinary people, to refugees here in the western part of Europe, you fully understand what is on stake. And I do see, and I can only repeat what I've heard from ordinary people. The majority, the vast majority, is in support or is in favor to support Ukraine, even with this kind of heavy weapon, because they understand that Ukraine does fight not just for its own existence, but also for Europe.
So what is it? Is it a fear of Russia on the part of the leadership?
Well, it might be a fear, but maybe there's still some hope that you can go back to business with Russia. I don't know what Putin has in its hand against certain people of the executive. As I said, one can only speculate. But from the military side, it seems to be very clear. And since all our partners are in favor, maybe apart from Hungary, but I mean, all the main NATO partners are in favor. And we have heard over the weekend how the disputes went on in the Chancellery after the Ramstein meeting. It seems to be obvious that not just people, I mean, the Polish government or the Baltic head of states were pretty upset with the position of the Chancellor, but obviously also the American partners. And that is, to be honest, a very scary situation when you manage to isolate Germany in a very short time.
There seems to be, Alexandra Filipenko, an acceleration, though, of the standoff between NATO partners and Russia. We've had ambassadors recalled from 2 of the Baltic states, at least this Monday. Have we reached some kind of a point of no return now?
Well, it seems that we have reached this point of no return on February 24th, or we must have reached that point of no return on February 24th last year. But now it looks like President Putin and Russia, generally Russian politicians, are more, let's say, open to the idea of admitting that this is not a special military operation, as they've been calling it all this time. But now even President Putin is calling it a war. And I must say that it's quite interesting to follow some Twitter and Telegram channels of some pro-Russian activists, like, for example, Mr. Strelkov, who played a big part in capturing Crimea at some point, who was head of militant groups in Donetsk and Luhansk, so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. He said that now, well, everything, basically, what Strelkov writes is what Kremlin actually thinks. And now he just a few days ago and today he repeated that now it's an uncompromising war, an uncompromising complete conquest of Ukraine, and the elimination of its statehood is the only way to move forward for Russia. So now they openly say that even the people from the Donetsk and Luhansk republics, those politicians, are saying that the aims of the war are not to free those republics, as they call it, but to capture Ukraine. So now they are more open in what they actually have been trying to achieve. And in this regard, it looks like, yes, we've reached some kind of a point of no return, at least also in the public opinion. Russians are more open to the idea of the war because propaganda has been working so well. Nothing has been so successful in Russia as the propaganda. So now it's quite different. And that is, again, one of the reasons why it feels like Russia might be going on the offensive.
Lots of questions on the hashtag F24debate. Jean-Paul Paloméros, Simon wants to know, are the tanks being sent from NATO or from individual member states?
No, the countries are sovereign. NATO can harmonize, can help. The group of contact which gathered in Ramstein was led by the US, by the way, US Secretary of Defense and US Joint Chief of Staff. So NATO is there to make sure that conversations can go on between the allies, but no, it is the individual nations take their own responsibility in supporting Ukraine in its legitimate right of self-defense.
Tanks, when you send them in, you need a lot of them, as was said earlier by Frédéric Moreau, and you also have to maintain them. You basically need a crew of mechanics to go along with them. It's sophisticated machinery. It's a big decision, and it's a big decision as well because there are several different types of models. Is NATO up to this task?
No, it's not. Again, it's not NATO task. It's for the nations who owns Leopard 2, let's say, to deliver the training, to deliver logistics, the maintenance, to deliver, to train the Ukrainians to do that. So first and foremost,
how long would that training take?
Yeah, good point. if you launch that today, you will not have tanks tomorrow. Huh? It will need, for my own assessment, at least 2 months could be okay for a certain number of tanks to be operational with operational crews. In addition, those tanks brings precision, which is really demanded by Ukrainian, because the Ukrainian needs the quality against the quantity, if I may say so. They have won and they have been able to counter attack because they had the quality in weapons, Caesar, HIMARS, and other type of artillery. So now they need up-to-date tanks to be more protected, and Frederick Moore said that very well. But it will take time. So there is no time to make this decision. And for the Germany, it is a crucial time as well to decide whether it goes forward and with his own power, economic power and military power, and take his place, his full place in the European defense and supporting Ukraine or not. And I think this is why it's so difficult at a political level in Germany, from my own perspective, because it is a strategic moment. The Germans have decided to put a lot of money on their budget defense. Now they have to tell what to do what for. And Ukraine is a good test case.
Ukraine, it's more than a test case. Just briefly on this, Viola von Krammen, is the coalition in trouble over this?
It's hard for me to judge this. I don't see that they're seriously in trouble, but I see there are diverging opinions. Maybe you have heard what the chair of the Committee for Defensive Affairs said over the weekend. She expressed her deep disappointment over the non-decision, so to say. She harshly criticized the chancellor. There were some opinions also from us, from our Green colleagues. They were, of course, not satisfied. Well, they were pushing and putting pressure on the Chancellery and on the Social Democrats for quite some time. So I do hope, and also with the new Minister for Defense, Boris Pistorius, that we do see a quick or swift reaction and a quick decision. But yes, honestly, of course, it would help all of us, especially here in Europe, if we could see that this Leopard, which is broadly used in Europe, and that's why it is rather easy, I understood from our military expert, to build up a supply chain for one standardized tank than different ones from different companies and so on. So yes, I see that our coalition could work easier if we finally had a decision on the tanks.
Germany's government denies weekend reports that Olaf Scholz's refusal to make a snap decision made for a testy conversation between the Chancellor and the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin when he visited last week. The Germans, not to be left on a limb, have asked Washington to supply Abrams tanks. But the Pentagon's top policy advisor, quoted by the Reuters news agency, as saying, "I don't think we're there yet." Colin Kahl saying the Abrams tank is a very complicated piece of equipment. It's expensive. It's hard to train on. It has a jet engine. So the U.S. Not sending Abrams tanks. Frédéric Moreau, first of all, your reaction to these reports that the Germans said, yes, we'll do it if the Americans do it too.
Yes, in my view, what I understand from these positions is that both governments want different things. The fear of the objective of the Americans is more for internal political reasons to make sure that the Europeans make the right efforts for a war in which they are concerned at the first place. They don't want to go alone. They have done a lot, tremendous efforts to support Ukraine. Now, for internal political reasons, they need to show to the public, American public, that Europeans too are doing their part. With regards to the Germans, but is a speculation, I suspect that the fear of the Chancellor is to be dragged in a war with Russia, and we have to remember that Germany does not have nuclear armament. So he wants to make sure that if the worst comes, he will get the protection of the Americans. That's my understanding of the situation.
General Paloméros?
Well, I think that first, NATO is a nuclear power, and we must remind that to everybody. And secondly, I really feel that there is this hesitancy of Germany is very much linked to his situation. Obviously, history can tell us a lot about the implication of the Nazis in Ukraine, and that could be a point for the Chancellor saying, well, let's be careful to play with that, okay? But nowadays there is something even very much more important, which is going on in Ukraine for the future of Europe, on the Europe soil. So as I said before, I think it's a turning point for Germany, whether they decide to go on and to support. And this is not waging the war against Russia. It's just to supporting a country which has been attacked by a major power. And the Ukraine is legitimate to defend itself. So I don't see the tanks being a kind of the step forward, the step too much in escalation. I think really that the Germany has to come to its proper decision about not only what is happening now, the future of European defense.
I'm following this on my phone.
But at what point is there mission creep? I mean, there is, at what point do you say, what is the point of no return between NATO and Russia?
Again, NATO is there to defend the borders of NATO. So let's not confuse the issue. A lot of countries, a lot of allies have decided to support Ukraine with equipment. This is what is happening now. No man, no combat, no boots on the ground, if I may say so. But the most we can do to support Ukraine, because Ukraine is the future as well, somewhere of Europe, and we cannot let the Russians do what Mr. Putin do, what he has decided to launch this war against this country. So is there a mission creeping? I don't think so, because the Western countries, the allies, they provide the weapons which the Ukraine needs according to Ukrainian strategy. And it has worked quite well so far. And this is why this question of tank is so crucial, because in the Ukrainian strategy, as they have developed, they want to counterattack and they want to push the Russians. They don't want to be pushed and to be pushed to a trenches kind of war. They want to gain the initiative again, to regain part of their territory, and possible the whole territory. This is another story, but at least to regain part of the Donbas, to push in the south as well, and to make sure that they put the Russians under pressure.
Put the Russians under pressure, but again, I'm haunted by what you said earlier about how long it takes to train soldiers for those tanks. Alexandra Filipenko, at the very earliest, it would be end of March?
It looks like that, or even further down, because I've heard that Leopard 2 model and spare parts are needed for this particular model. And there is this special point that I'd like to add. I'm not a military expert, but as far as I know from history of between Poland and the United States, I know that Poland is in a unique situation right now, because Poland was planning for a few years now to switch to American Abrams tanks and to let go of Leopard's generally. They didn't want to keep the Leopard tanks. So they are ready to give those Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine, partially, I guess, because they were planning on switching to American models. And in order to create new models, in order to create new tanks, in order not to weaken Germany's own defense capabilities, in order to make those new tanks, they would need 8 to 12 months. And they are not prepared. German defense companies could not prepare them sooner. And if they give them now, they might weaken their own defense capabilities. And to the point of where is this point of no return? Sorry for repeating. For now, Europe is still not part of the conflict, not part of the open conflict, not part of the war. And they are only supporting Ukraine every way that they can and every way that Europe can. So this is why I think some European politicians are not eager to give everything away right now. So this is, but of course, it's understandable it causes understandable frustration in Kyiv, because Kyiv has been asking for those tanks since the beginning of the invasion. And to quote President Zelensky in one of his recent interviews, he said that this position of Germany that they will give tanks only if the United States provides those Abrams is not fair to the people, is not fair to the living people. So this huge standoff, of course, continues, and the time is running out. The time, as it's already been said, the time is, we might say, on Russia's side a little bit.
Time is a little bit on Russia's side. Of course, we saw that joint press conference between the French president and the German chancellor at the Sorbonne in Paris on Sunday. And Frédéric Moreau, I don't know if you can hear us. No, well, I'll ask. Sorry, I'll put it to you, Jean-Paul Paloméros. Emmanuel Macron sounded a lot like Olaf Scholz, replaced the word leopard with the French Leclerc tanks. He's left the door open but didn't commit. Is it that problem that Alexander Filipenko was just pointing at, which is that, well, we don't have a lot of capacity to actually export many?
Yes, this is true. The French have put on the table, the light armored vehicles, which is quite capable. IMX-10. So that was the first move in terms of armored vehicles, fighting tanks. In opening the door for Leclerc, which for me it's not really a go, because as it was said before, Ukraine cannot cope with many type of different tanks. It's quite difficult. They can use them, but it will make them less effective. So going for one type, and we are lucky because we have this Leopard 2 family. So I fully agree that this is the good way forward. But obviously, to help and to support the Chancellor, Emmanuel Macron has had something to give. And he said, well, France is considering, but I don't think it will happen. And the question of number is there. There are about 200 or a little bit more than that operational Leclerc in the inventory today. That will be tough to give more on 20, 30. Well, at the end of the day, it could happen, but that will not be very effective.
So Viola von Krammen, yours is the country that makes the workhorse of European tanks. If you want to train people as fast as possible on one model, it's the Leopard 2s. What can Germany expect in return from its neighbors like France?
Well, this is hard to say for me to say what actually is expected from France or other countries who could not deliver Leopards to Ukraine. I don't know whether there is any kind of a deal or any kind of a package which was debated yesterday or on the Ramstein conference or summit. So I would not focus on France. I know that they do their job, they do their part. I would rather focus on Germany itself and make sure that Germany takes up the lead, which is expected, and speaks to those countries who are willing to help, to support, to send, to train, and to produce. I mean, we were speaking a lot about ammunition, we were speaking about supply chain, and we all expect that this war, unfortunately, will not end by tomorrow. So we need to look also into the mid and long term, and we need to make sure that the time you were mentioning is not on Russia's side, that the huge losses, the huge casualties which Ukraine had faced for the last weeks during this Donbas battle is not going on and does not continue, because otherwise the bottleneck is on one hand the heavy weapons, but on the other hand, of course, also then the forces in terms of people, of soldiers. So for this, I think it's overdue, and I expect the Chancellor to act rather than to wait for France and others to act.
All right, the push for NATO allies to do more, you could argue, fits in with the narrative out of Moscow. Listen to the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, in Pretoria this Monday as he met his South African counterpart, Nadeli Pandor.
When we speak about what is happening in Ukraine, it is a war, not a hybrid one, almost a real war that the West has been plotting for a long time against Russia. The goal is to destroy everything Russian, from language to culture that has been in Ukraine for centuries, and to prohibit people from speaking their mother tongue.
Alexander Filipenko, the goal there you hear from Sergei Lavrov is to destroy everything Russian. This conversation we're having, is this music to the ears of Moscow?
Oh, well, yes. I mean, mostly the main music, the loudest music to the ears of Moscow is the fact that Europe and the United States are divided, and Europe is divided within itself. This is that's why I think they might be opening the champagne right now. While we see that Europeans and Americans are still supporting the idea of providing Ukraine with more help, for the Kremlin, it's divide and conquer. That is their idea of moving forward. This is how I think they will be trying to move forward, dealing with Europe and dealing with the United States any way that they can. And talking about, if I may add something to what Mr. Lavrov said, I have some friends who are in Ukraine right now, and they've been asking the soldiers on the front line, what language are you speaking in the trenches? How are you speaking in the trenches? And they say that they are speaking 4 languages. They're speaking Ukrainian, they're speaking Russian, they're speaking bad Russian and bad Ukrainian, that's censored, let's say, languages. And it doesn't matter how on what language the fight started, it doesn't matter. There are a lot of Ukrainians that are fighting against Russia to speak in Russian in free Ukraine afterwards. So they would have the right to speak in Russian in Ukraine. So all those words that we've been hearing from Mr. Lavrov are somehow contradictory to the facts. And of course, I'm sorry for commenting on that, but yes, to your point, it's music to their ears to hear Europe fighting about tanks and about ammunition, and United States and Europe contradicting each other. So yes, for them, it's a good point right now.
Frédéric Moreau, the images of the Russian foreign minister in South Africa striking, because it's also a reminder that the view of what's happening in Ukraine is very different once you leave Europe.
It is indeed. That doesn't mean that all countries are on the side on the side of Russia. You have to take in mind that South Africa is part of the BRICS alliance, so it's somewhere natural that they have a more soft approach towards Russia. But the truth is that Russia is isolated in the world. It's not because a lot of people are not aligned that they are in favor of Russia.
And you heard earlier Viola von Krammen commenting on the fact that German public opinion has turned squarely against Russia since the invasion. What about France? Can public opinion, which right now is solidly behind Ukraine, will it stay that way?
Well, it's difficult to look in the crystal ball, but yes, the more people in France see ideas face of the war, the atrocity made by the Russian soldiers and the Russian generals, it's a butchery. The more they are in favor of Ukraine, of course, it's normal. It will take generations to Russians to come back to Europe in the mind of Europeans.
It'll take generations, you say. Jean-Paul Paloméros, we've enjoyed on this continent, for the most part, if you exclude places like the former Yugoslavia, we've enjoyed incredible amounts of peace since 1945. Your job as a military man, of course, is to troubleshoot scenarios. But did you ever expect that in the 21st century we would have a conventional war on this continent?
Well, after the 2014, it came clear, I was in NATO at the time, that we had to prepare for something of that kind happening. Before, perhaps, there has been the Georgia invasion. But no, obviously, for my part, I was an operational guy during the Cold War. And in 1991, I say, well, fortunately for Europe, this is the end of one story and the opening of a new page. But so the moral of that is that we have to be prepared to fight together. And I would like to stress that this is true that today we have a question about the tanks. But on the larger scale, on the broader view, the European countries and the Americans and few others are very much aligned since the beginning of this conflict. So let's not give the impression or the opportunity to Mr. Lavrov, to Mr. Putin, to dig into a kind of a hole. There is no, well, this is a debate that we have today about a certain capability, but all in all, the pledge from the different countries is there to support ammunitions, to support the capabilities that Ukrainians need. If we had not been there to support them, Ukraine will not be free today and sovereign. So let's keep some optimism. It will come. And the Ukrainians are very good warriors. They are doing very well. They need our support. But we must not leave the disinformation campaign gaining the pace and putting too much pessimism on what we try to achieve.
Wiel van Krammen, I can ask you exactly the same question I just asked the general, because I'm old enough to remember when the Greens emerged as a movement that fought against the fact that there were NATO bases in Germany and against those missiles in the 1980s. So when you look at what's going on today in the 21st century, why has your voice been so loud behind Ukraine?
Well, I mean, we are also the Party for Human Rights and Justice, and we always fought for the weakest or for the weaker part. And in that war, it is very obvious who is the aggressor and who is the victim, who needs protection and who needs to be defeated. It's pretty much black and white, and I think this is mainly understood by our members of the party, by our people in positions, by our ministers, of course, and also by the broader majority of our voters. We have adapted extremely, I would say, fast to the new situation. Of course, it is very unusual that especially people from our party were asking for Leopards early or for tanks as such, for robust support for Ukraine. But we do understand, especially as Germans, that the tragedy we brought during the Second World War over these countries, such as Belarus, Poland, Ukraine, but also the Baltic states, where we caused a tragedy of only in Ukraine of over 6 million people, be it civilians or soldiers, that it is also in our historical responsibility to protect Ukraine now, that things like that, eradicating a country from the map, which obviously has Russia in mind, cannot be, or we can't let that happen. We need to defend Ukraine, and for that, we need all possible means.
Viola von Krammen, I want to thank you so much for being with us from Brussels. I want to thank Frédéric Moreau as well for being with us from there. Alexandra Filipenko in Vilnius, Jean-Paul Paloméros in Malaga. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Welcome.